word for a shofar. The shofar is blown on Yom Kippur of that year, and we have another year that the land lies fallow. So the land lies fallow in 49th year, 50th year, and then only in the next year can you start to work the land. So actually it's not going to be a harvest until the third year. So in our Torah portion, the divine promises that God's blessing will be upon the people. Don't worry, I'll provide enough. And this idea of divine providence, meaning God will provide, of course, is a very, very difficult concept. I think it's ever since people began to believe there's some kind of divine force in the world. When people believed that there were opposing divine forces in the world, when people believed in many gods, there was a God of bounty who promised goodness and also a destructive God. And these this kind of dualism helped explain why evil happens. When you move into monotheism, and in general, the belief that's never explicitly said in the Torah, by the way, this is more of a Aristotelian, Maimonidean idea that I don't think is actually a biblical idea, and that is that God is all-knowing. There are many passages in the Torah where God does not know what's going on. God is all-powerful. There are many passages in the Torah where God does not have power, especially over people. God is, I keep missing one of the three O's and the B, omnipresent, present in all places at all times. Again, there are times when, especially for example, Garden of Eden, where God says, "Where are you?" People want to describe that metaphorically, but actually it might be that the God of the Garden of Eden does not know where Adam and Eve are hiding. And then God is benevolent. You add all these up, we have what's called the question of theodicy, theo meaning God, and dike is the Greek word for justice, or the justice of God. The K sound in Greek turned into the soft C in English. We actually should say theodike, but everybody says theodicy. And this is one of the most difficult ideas in any religion. I'm one of those that refuses to make sense of it, that human suffering is somehow rooted in the divine, and there is something called ultimate divine justice, at least at this realm. And I came to the solution for many reasons. First of all, I just knew of human suffering, and people would go through what I called were kind of theological contortions to say, well, there's a divine plan. We don't know what it is. God has God's own reasons. And I thought that's just all to maintain what I think is an untenable idea that everything is from God. I just don't believe it. Then, of course, I taught Holocaust for 10 years at USC. And, every semester I went, from the beginnings of hatred of Jews down into the camps. It was an incredibly difficult journey for me to take. It actually broke my heart many times to have the privilege of leading the students there. But I think anybody who teaches Holocaust studies never comes out the same. And the end of the course was post-Holocaust theology. One of the most important lines I ever read was a long article by Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, a fantastic rabbi. Everything he writes is of value. And he wrote in the article, he says, any theology that you're going to teach, say it to a mother whose child has been thrown into the flames. If you can say it to her, go ahead and teach it. If you can't say it to her, don't teach it. And it was a kind of a shocking article because there were those who said, well, there is no God if there was a Holocaust, which, again, I think is a not well thought idea. And others would say the Holocaust and all horrible things that happen to people, there's some kind of divine plan. So I reject both of them. So what's my position? The position that people have about atheism because of evil, I've said this many times, but it goes something like this. People say, if there is God, there can't be evil. Since there is evil, there can't be God. It's a kind of a proof. I remember one time I was doing one of my endless bar mitzvahs when I was an assistant rabbi up at Stephen Weiss Temple, and I finished the service, a 4 o'clock to 5:15 service. I walked out. There's this guy waiting for me, and he says, "So you're the rabbi?" I said, "Yeah, I'm the rabbi. I was just in that room." He says, "So you believe in God?" I knew it was coming. I said, "After a manner of speaking, yes." He said, "Well, then how do you explain the Holocaust?" I kind of lost it. I didn't raise my voice. I said, if you don't want to believe in God, don't believe in God. But don't bring up the memory of the 6 million to justify your atheism. Just be an atheist. Don't do that. And it was a tough moment, but I'm really tired of people using the suffering of others, don't believe in others to justify their atheism. The way that I worked this through was is to define the word evil. Now, remember, if the word evil actually names something real, which means if there is God, there can't be evil. Well, I would say if there's evil, there has to be some standard of the good, because the problem is good isn't happening. So if evil is real, then God is real, necessarily. Okay? Meaning if there's no moral values, if everything is morally equal, there's no such thing as morality, just human behavior, well, then there's no evil. If one says because there is evil, there no is God, define evil, which means something like an affront to the good. So if there is evil, there must be good, as a comparative word. And then it's up to that person to ask where the good comes from and why is the good better than evil. We're not going to go down that road today. So in my evolving belief system, when I discovered the Kabbalah in my early 20s, and I learned about the brokenness of the divine, and that the divine will to the good is shattered in the what's called the Shvirat HaKelim, the breakage of the structure of the divine mind, that God is not all-powerful. In fact, something happens in the breakage that unleashes a power of evil called the Sitra Achra that operates in the human being as the Yetzer Hara. So if God is not omnipotent down in this world, and if there is a Sitra Achra, that means God is not omnipotent because there's another power. And if we all have a Yetzer Hara, which we all do, that means God is not omnipotent with us. So when the Torah says, I will take care of you, I understand why people needed to believe that. I understand people needed to believe in one God who was omnipotent and good. But then over and over again, even when God says, I will take care of you, if you go to next week's Torah portion, it's pretty horrible what the God of the Bible, I always make sure to say what the God of the Bible says the God of the Bible will do to people who disobey. So I've known so many people who have suffered so unjustly, so unfairly, so horribly all over the world. Not to mention the recent bestial atrocities on October 7th. There's no way that a God can be behind this. It's just evil. And people will say, why didn't God protect them? And my answer is, in general, I'm sorry to say, God doesn't protect any of us. Nobody comes into this world with an exemption from the random wicked hand of fate. That's just real. Now, I do believe deeply in Elohut, in the divine. I feel I have an authentic connection with the divine. So how does that work out? Very briefly. For me, and again, I'm not trying to be an apologist. I'm not trying to make this all work out even. It's just something I feel deeply. I believe that the divine is present in the soul, and there's a divinely bestowed wisdom in the soul to help us deal with grief and suffering, and maybe even our own suffering. So the few times that I've suffered, nothing like what I've seen other people suffer, but in my own mild versions. I never felt God is doing this to me. What I felt is there's a dignified way to suffer. Now, I, like all of you, I'm going to leave this world. And I don't believe death is punishment. I believe death is something we all go through, and I hope I go through that. That passes from this world to the next with my dignity intact and my belief that I'm entering into the next passage of the existence of my being. So, if someone is suffering, my plea to you is don't say there's a divine plan. Don't say, oh, God is ultimately good, there must be a reason. That's like Job's friends who tried to tell Job there is a just universe when the readers know from the book of Job, we don't live in a just universe. Kabbalah says we live in a broken universe, and therefore we human beings have the responsibility, as much as we can, for us to be compassionate and for us to act justly, thus bringing repair to ourselves, to other people, and ideally the world. So that's my 10 minutes of thought on the idea of theodike, God's justice. And again, I don't believe we live in a world that is just, but we human beings can channel justice. I want to get into my topic for today. We touched on it last night because our Torah portion proclaims liberty throughout the land. And one of the problems with this Torah portion is we assume the Bible means what we mean when we say liberty. Now, the Bible does give us a sense of, it's clear that the biblical word dror, liberty or freedom, does not equal the modern idea. Why? Because the liberty is you get to go home. The tribes had ancestral holdings. There's something very holy about that each person's tribe, ultimately, the tribal integrity has to be restored. So no matter how much land is bought and sold over a 50-year period, after 50 years, people go back to the holdings of their ancestors. If you don't think about it too hard, it's a beautiful idea. If you think about actually executing this idea, it turns out to be untenable. In fact, there's no evidence in any First Temple source that this ever happened. So if we believe Torah is given at Mount Sinai, which of course I don't, I believe it comes into being over centuries, but even one would expect that was such a dramatic law described in Exodus 23, in Torah portion Behar, in the remission of debts in Deuteronomy 15, you'd have some record of it in the Bible. Well, we just don't. And as I said last night, most of the Talmud's attention to letting the land lie fallow are ways to get around it. In fact, the remission of debts, which is discussed in Deuteronomy chapter 15, was overturned by the rabbis. So the question is, of course, how can the rabbis who believe that Torah is divinely given overturn a divine law? Well, the great sage Hillel was behind this, and he's in a way in some ways one of the great archetypal minds of the Talmud, where he says something like, I'm rephrasing his inner thinking, it's a great idea, but it's bad law. You could never get a mortgage. You could never get a loan. Just try to imagine that someone wants to borrow money from you, but you have to cancel the debt every 7 years. The economy grinds to a halt because we actually borrow, we invest, we pay back the investors. That's just part of how an economy works, beyond a bartering economy. People obviously were just violating it, and so he issued what's called the prose bull, which is, I believe, Latin for an edict, where he says, debts are given to the court, and the court collects the debt. And somehow, since I don't own the debt anymore, I don't have to cancel the debt, the court holds the debt, and somehow the court is exempt from this law. It's a workaround that more or less says the law creates more inequity because people can't get a loan, for example, to launch a business or buy a home. So even though, and I said this last night, the values in the land lying fallow, the values in the remission of debts, I think the values are really interesting to look at. But then the question is actually the execution of these values, the as it were, enforcement of these values. And as I said last night, typically speaking, whenever we try to bring a simple solution to the, I'll say, enforcement or manifesting of our values, simple solutions oftentimes end in catastrophe. So that being said, the idea of justice is worth discussing. I don't have answers for you. I've just been studying it my entire adult life. And I want to say to all of you, the feeling of lack of justice, of lack of fairness, is one of the most profound feelings in the human condition. If you're not treated justly or fairly, for example, by people who are supposed to love you, to be civil to you, to nourish you, to support you, it's really, in some ways, a violation of our dignity, our violation of our self-regard, how we see ourselves. So we naturally seek justice as fair treatment, and when we don't, we suffer sometimes great emotional harm. We feel horrible. It is utterly natural. When we suffer loss that seems unjustifiable, that seems inexplicable, why do we not easily say we live in a random universe and it's up to us to bring justice? Because when we suffer loss, there's something in us that says, this is not fair. This is not right. I didn't do anything. Now, it's a kind of a primal cry. Whenever I felt it, I don't silence that cry. This is not fair. This is not right. I've done everything I can to produce goodness here, and things are beyond my control. Of course I feel it's not right. It's not fair. There's pain in my heart. But what I want to do is exercise what I call the path of thinking, derech machshava, the path of right thinking. My feelings are one thing, my right thinking are another. And in pain, and I assume all of you have had deep pain because of loss, grief, suffering, betrayal, not being treated right by those who love you. It's a natural feeling. We go into derech machshava, and you say to yourself, as I tried to describe last week, you say to yourself somewhat philosophically, well, I'm not the only one. Whatever I'm going through right now, there's probably a million people going through exactly the same thing, if not more. It's not personal. It's the human condition. That's number one. I'm not being picked on by the divine. I'm just a human being in this unfair world. It's part of the human condition. Then you go deeper and say, since suffering is inevitable, the question is, what do we do with our suffering? And as I emphasized last week, I'm not saying we should all go to grieving well. I'm not saying we all should bear our suffering with dignity. If some people's suffering is so profound, there is no dignified way through it. So I'm not being judgmental. I'm saying for those who want to go through suffering, restore their inner sense of self, there's a path. And for me, the path is not asking why. The path is, how do I connect with a part of myself that is deeper than what happens to me, which is the realm of the soul. So I don't turn to God to protect me or to solve the problem. I turn to God for wisdom, but I turn to the divine because in the soul is where I find the center of my being. And part of what I say to the world out there, things can go wrong, but you can't get to the center of my being. I sometimes call this you can say the inner sanctuary. When life gets rough, you might say the terrible things in life want to encroach on our sense of well-being. If you don't protect your inner sanctuary, we really can suffer unspeakable inner injury. So what I don't want to happen is for suffering to get to my inner temple. So how do I keep my inner temple strong? I have to work on it. And that's one thing I said. For people who don't work on protecting the inner temple, suffering of life can devastate them because they don't have any immunity in the deepest part of their being. So I'm not saying we ought not suffer. I'm saying ideally we live lives of spiritual wisdom and consciousness so our suffering does not destroy our inner wholeness. It's a very difficult idea. I'm not saying you have to do it. I'm saying there's a path of pnimiut, of inwardness, of tending to the care of the soul. Okay, putting that aside. So why does it hurt so much? Because we have an inborn sense of justice, of tzedek. So I want to talk a little bit about this natural human experience of fairness, justice, and when we see other people who are not treated fairly. So just a few notes on justice, and I want to get this up, so if anybody wants to review, when I say, what do I mean by justice, you have a few thoughts. First of all, it's justice as fairness. Now, remember, when you get to core words of the human experience, the words all involve each other. So when you say justice as what is right as what is fair as what is just, is not word games. It means you've hit the rock bottom of human experience, and you can't go to a deeper level of the word. So that's when people that mistakenly think about language is that words are somehow transparent. That you can look at the word justice and say, oh, I can see that through that word, and it's just a societal norm. So if someone says, justice isn't real, it's just a societal norm, I want to say, well, I don't think you've experienced your life real. Because justice is real. We act when justice refers to something real. So it's not as if you look through the word and find something else. When you hit words like love, justice, truth, beauty, and the good, you've actually hit the root of human experience. You can't reduce it to something else. You can't look through it and see something else. What a wise human being does is contemplate these words. So I'm not looking for something inside of justice. For example, it's just societal norms. I say, well, it's real. The word actually refers to something metaphysical. So my question is, how do I become a just person? What can I do to create justice in my life? What can I do to create a just society? I don't say it's not real. I say it's very real. And the reality of this word creates in me a moral obligation. So I think connected to the word, which means entailed in the word justice, is human dignity and human self-regard. The times that I've been treated unjustly, as I said last week, it can topple my sense of self. Who am I that a person feels free to say that or do that? I mean, can't they see the sign on me that says created in the image of God? Well, obviously not. And you have all been treated terribly unjustly by other people. Your sense of your dignity, your sense of self is violated. So part of what justice entails is self-regard and dignity. So when we are treated unjustly, it assaults our sense of self, and that's where the spiritual work requires that we regain our balance. And of course, we promise to treat each other fairly and not treat each other unjustly, and justice as fairness. Now, let's try to take that out to society. When I see people treated unjustly, of course, I want to help. I think there's two motivations. One is motivation of compassion, where I look at the suffering first and I want to help them and protect them. And the other motivation, and they're not mutually exclusive, is righteousness. I look at the aggressor or the situation and I want to fix that. So whenever we see something unjust happening to others, I think we're motivated by compassion and motivated by what's in Hebrew is called yosher, the right path. Now, the problem with compassion and yosher as motivations, they're not necessarily wise. Which means just because you feel compassion what you feel you want to do might not be the right thing. I mean, the classic example, of course, is feelings of compassion for an addict or an alcoholic. They say, if you really loved me, you'd buy me booze. And when you say no, they say, well, you don't love me, you don't care about me. They say, I have great compassion for you. My heart's breaking for you, but I'm not going to help you make you feel better through medicating yourself. Now, just take that example and ask ourselves, when we think we know what a suffering person needs, the first thing to think is, I might be wrong. I might actually be making it worse. Again, look at Job's friends. Job's friends thought they knew how to help Job. Well, they didn't. So we can all find ourselves in the role of being the ironical friend of Job, which means no friend at all. So compassion is a motivation, but it's not the end of justice. It motivates us to create justice. And again, we're back to what I call derech hamachshava, the path of right thinking. The fact that I want to help somebody is good. What exactly to do is not knowledge given to us naturally. The same thing in trying to create justice as rightness. For example, when we say social ethics or social justice, our drive to fix the law and fix society is an excellent motivation. In fact, in the Federalist Papers, it says, justice is the proper ends of the state. The state is there to create justice. So again, it's utterly natural. I think we have a moral duty to create justice. The problem is we sometimes lack the wisdom to create justice. And many people rely on their emotions and think, because I have the emotion, the drive, the urge to create justice, whatever I come up with is going to create justice. And that's why we see that so many social justice, social ethics programs actually end in a fizzle or a disaster, because people haven't really thought through what exactly to do to help the suffering or to create a just society. I think the decades-long problem with homelessness in our, I'll say our city is a good example. I remember I read an article that said, called something like it may have been an article that I was writing, the 15 causes of homelessness, including mental illness and just being between jobs, and there's different remedies for each of them. And the idea that there's a one-size-fits-all remedy for homelessness, especially for people who don't want to be on the grid. They actually don't want to have an address, don't want to be taxed. They want to, what we used to call a hobo. That's their chosen life. So who are we? So again, the problem with the urge for justice is we might not have the wisdom. I'm not saying we can't gain the wisdom, but the wisdom is not automatically granted just because we want to create social justice. So there's two kinds of, that's comment one on social justice. My second comment on justice, and this typically is a divide between people who tend center conservative or center liberal. The more conservative-oriented believe in procedural justice, which is if we create true equal opportunity, if the rules are fair, if the playing field is fair, we don't mess with the outcomes. So we don't change the procedure. For example, affirmative action. If not enough of a given minority group are getting into college, we don't lower the standards and create a quota system. That would be against certain ideals of justice. So what do? We create outreach to those who don't seem to be able to, assuming that we're all equally intelligent and have the equal drive for success, we reach out with programs that help people pass the SATs and get into college. Instead of creating a quota, we create more opportunity by helping people engage in the procedures of justice. That's my preferred approach. We have a wonderful city college system in our, in our state. Anybody can go to city college. You can go to city college and take classes in language and math and get your scores up, and then apply to college. That's my approach. Okay. Some people say it's heartless. I don't think it's heartless, but maybe. Another kind of justice, this is called procedural, which means set up right procedures And if it doesn't look good, work on causes, but don't try to force outcomes. Now, there's another kind of justice, which is called consequentialist justice, is if you look at the outcomes and the outcomes don't seem just, you have to fix the procedure. I think that's part of what I'll call the good side of DEI is. They're looking at how some minority groups just don't seem to be competing well, so we have to reach in. And DEI, again, in its best sense, it's just affirmative action. And again, I'm not saying you shouldn't believe in it. I don't think it's ultimately good, but I could be wrong. So that's typically a break between, at least on this issue. The conservatives are more focused on fairness. Liberals are more focused on outcomes. That's something to always keep in mind when you talk about justice, because oftentimes when I would have this conversation, people say to me, I don't care. That's what they would say to me. I don't care about justice. I said, I care greatly about justice, but I think the long-term solution is help people follow procedural justice. Again, I could be wrong. So here's one thing I found, that when most people disagree on how to, for example, achieve justice, they actually all believe in some version of justice. They just believe in different modalities for achieving justice, which is why rational civil debate is so important. So I hear them, they hear me, and I'm open to changing my mind. I've changed my mind on many political issues because I let someone reason with me. I said, I've been wrong about this. Thank you so much for enlightening me. I'm very influenced by our tradition. I know some people, when they talk about immigrants, I say, I'm so sorry. I have a Bible, and the Bible says the widow, orphan, poor, and stranger. I can't just ignore that. And people say to me, well, it's going to lead to the devastation of the economy and illegal. I said, look, I know. I know everything that you know, except I have a value. And the value is make things better for the stranger. I just can't not deny it's there. So I have a pre-existing value because I allowed the Bible to guide me. So people say to me, well, you're a wacko liberal. I said, no, I'm not. I just, I'm a dedicated Jew. Sorry, let's just leave it at that. So again, our ideas of justice are influenced by what we read, what we think, our devotional life, and Jonathan Haidt, H-I-I-D-T, he thinks it's kind of preset that we have justice personalities, and I don't believe that because I've changed my views on justice many times, as have many of you. And why? Because of derech hamachshava, the holy path of thought. I'm opening to reasoning with people, and I'm hoping to be. And I'm open for a person using reason to show me that my thinking on a given issue is not correct as I try to take my moral axioms and produce them into policies. So this leads to where I went last night is something that I was very fortunate to have when I was in graduate school was the economic consequences of values. Anytime you mention that, some people their eyes just glaze over. And the idea that values have economic consequences. And the problem is, whenever you assign, let's say, societal means, we'll say the scarce meaning it's not endless. The scarce wealth of society, let's say the government treasury, when you do one thing with it, you're not doing something else. So the question is, if we have scarcity, which means nothing is in unlimited supply, anything that we're talking about, and the person says, we should assign those scarce resources here, it means you can't assign those scarce resources there. Right? That's called economics of values. If you have values and you want to assign scarce resources, to fulfillment of those values, you're not doing something else, either with your money or with your time, your energy. There's many different things. So there are many things I love to do to help others with my time, energy, and money, but I can't do all of them because those are scarce resources. So part of the economics of values and the economics of justice is, where do we put our time, money, and energy to create the most justice possible with limited means. This sounds somewhat utilitarian, but again, I don't think the good is the greatest good for the greatest numbers. I think the good is something metaphysical. But once I believe the good is metaphysical, then I really ought to create the good, which is not the same thing as a public opinion poll. The good is something that we have to talk and meditate on. Maybe we can talk about that another time. Two last brief thoughts. There's a great book called A Theory of Justice by John Rawls, written in the 70s. When I was in graduate school, we had to almost have that book memorized. And here's a kind of a utilitarian theory of justice. And he created a thought experiment. Try to imagine that I have a great-grandchild on the way, and I have no idea what that child will be like. Having disabilities, what racial group, anything. My great-grandchild could be anything that I can't shape. And looking at all the people alive today, my great-grandchild could be any one of them. So he wants to take the value of protecting your family and make that a societal value. Create laws so that our great-grandchildren are taken care of. I'm taking a vast book and simplifying it because he wants us to feel compassion for everyone that we would feel for a descendant. Now, okay, I used to be a Rawlsian until somebody talked me out of it, and here's the problem with Rawls. Rawls assumes that I know what to do. Rawls assumes that since I want this unknown great-grandchild who might be gifted, might be disabled, I don't know what, he assumes that we know what to do now to protect that child who's living, let's say, 20, 30 years from now. And now we're back to the question of not only scarcity of time, energy, and money, scarcity of wisdom. So I'm back to where I began. Justice is entirely worth thinking about. It's entirely worth meditating on. It's entirely worth being well spoken about it. And I say not argue about it, reason about it. And some of you have changed my mind. I may have changed the mind of a few. And this is the power of reasoning about what I'll call the core values of human existence. For example, love, justice, truth, and beauty, and the good. It's really worth talking about. And people who can't talk about it, like the whole thing in Israel, the campus protests, there are people who are just impervious to reasoning. It's sad, but they're just not worth our time. We're never going to get through. What we ought to do is reason with people who are open to reasoning, and hopefully we'll create some kind of tidal movement that will push the unreasoning people who can actually become vile, push them out to the margins. So, justice is real. Your feelings of wanting to be justice are connected to something real. Some of our core experiences in life are being treated unjustly and unfairly. It's real. Our motivation to create justice in society, that's a real, authentic motivation. And then we're left with the question, the wisdom to preserve our inner dignity, sense of self, to become a morally sound person who is able to think well and perhaps create justice in society. All right, those are my thoughts for this morning. I'll take a deep breath here and see if there are any questions about my offering to you a few notes on theory of justice. I know it's a lot. Abigail, you have a response?
I was honestly more caught up by the Parsha and the idea of intentional rest. That drew me today. Something that I've been going through and I've been wanting to focus on, and feeling like when you focus on one thing too much, you get distracted. You end up completely diving into the other when you lose it. So
Sure.
I've been practicing having that balance, and I suppose it does play into the idea of justice. Last night when I went to a Friday night dinner, we were discussing politics. We were discussing what's going on today, America's role in the war, and it was interesting taking a meta view instead of focusing on the thing that we were talking about. I was focused on my approach to arguing. And I was reflecting during the argument and thinking, I'm enjoying this. This is not. I like having discussion, having dialogue. Obviously, I don't want to fight with someone, but it is nice to be at a table where we can discuss what's going on in the world. And yeah, okay, maybe we get a little bit heated, but we know ultimately that we respect each other.
Great.
And
that's beautiful. If I may respond, when I think about these core drives of the human experience, virtue is, of course, one. Justice is, of course, one. And although this Torah portion, if you look at the context, especially look at the end of the Parsha, it really is something about justice, fairness, etc. But, of course, implicit in Shabbat is care for the soul. The Hebrew word is, the all-inclusive word is pnimiut, inwardness. And I think of there's basically, I'm open to more, but 10 basic drives that come out of the human condition. One is tzedek, justice, and one is pnimiut, caring for the soul, which is this intentional rest that allows us to have the qualities of love, for example, caring for others. If we don't care for our own souls, our love becomes even more scarce. So yes, the care of the soul is implicit in Shabbat, and justice is also implicit in Shabbat. So thank you for that comment. We'll go back to gallery and see if there's anybody else that wants to throw out a brief question or comment, and otherwise we will conclude for this morning. Yes, Helena, and then Diana.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Helena. Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. My question is, when somebody does not have the inner resources for wisdom, and they are asking, why me? Because they are, let's say they are dying. And I'm struggling with them because I want to guide them into a place where they can find some meaning in their suffering and reach out to others who are suffering, because I think that may be the only way to stop saying, why me? I had a dear friend who was dying who said, I don't ask why me, I ask why not me. That has been profound for me.
Thank you. So the question is, how is one present to a suffering, dying person? The first thing is, how do they want to suffer? How do they want to die? You have to know that. And if a person wants to go out with, why me? I don't want to take away a person's way of dying. Only if they say, can you help me stop saying, why me? I remember vividly one person deciding that her father needed to go to the light. And he said in his dying last day, quit telling me to go to the damn light. She wanted him to die her way. And he wanted to die his way, which was bitter. He lived bitter and he wanted to die bitter. Okay, so I learned from that. So my first thing is, if you're present to a suffering person, you want to find out as gently as possible, what does suffering mean to them? Does dying mean to them? I have the path that I teach, but I don't want to impose it on anybody, especially when they're in this existential crisis. Now, if a person says, I would like you to help me, then I would go to, first of all, it's not personal, it's the human condition. Number two, there is no justice, if you're wondering about that, in my opinion. It's not as if an omnipotent God has judged you. Third, the way we grieve well, including die well, is develop a connection with the soul, which I think should be lifelong work. And that's what I'm advocating last week and today, the lifelong work of pnimiut, of inwardness, caring for the soul, including the spiritual value of Shabbat. Thank you. And Diana, let me hear your question, and then and then maybe Rick or Lydia, and then we'll close for today. Yes, Diana.
What you just touched upon is hitting pretty close right now, as you know. But anyway, you brought up the subject of who do you leave your money to? A lot of us are making
Right.
trust now, and I know I'm fighting between being equal to my family and who is most needy.
Mhm.
It's just a comment. I don't know if you have anything
I,
to
I,
say.
I do have an answer. So the question is, as you're leaving money to survivors, is it equal, or do you help out the person who's not been as fortunate? And I've counseled families where the decisions that were made created horrible consequences and destroyed their families. Okay? So one thing is, if one wants to give more resources to one person, you have to talk to the other person and say, are they down on their luck? Or are they a ne'er-do-well who never worked for a living and was relying on the inheritance? So does the ne'er-do-well who's, let's say, Reuben, who never worked as hard as Simon, do they have an equal, just claim? Now, all I know is that when people have divided equally between the industrious child who's worked hard all their life and the ne'er-do-well who's never worked hard, Simon, the industrious person, was wounded forever because they thought this was profoundly unequal and unjust. Right? So whenever a parent says, well, justice is equal, I don't know. Isn't it strange? Equal might not be just. I mean, we have a thought problem is a person wants someone to dig, two guys to dig a ditch. One guy is a huge football linebacker and one's a scrawny little 130-pound wrestler. And he says, I'll get you both lunch. Does he buy them the same lunch? Which means, does he buy the big guy enough to fill his belly and buy the small guy enough to fill his belly? Well, that would seem just. It's not the same size of the pizza. It's what's going to fill you. So there are so many ways to think about it. I'm glad you're bringing it up. There really is no simple answer. If you want to talk about it, I'd be happy to talk about it further. And last question for today, Lydia and or Rick.
Hello.
Hey.
I've been around a few people who were dying, and it seems like their Itzhara just goes away, and the glory, and some of them have been so connected with their spiritual self that I just feel raised by the experience. I'd like you to deal with that.
Yes, the experience of witnessing another person's death. I have to share with you, when I started working as a rabbi, I did not expect that some of the deepest, most holy moments would be escorting a person from this world to the next. People did have profound sense of the next world opening up and great trust in the next world opening up. The couple of experiences I had where I think my soul thought I was dying, it turns out that I wasn't. I had doctors to protect me. I have vivid memories of my soul opening up because my soul, is, the human condition is 100,000 years old. So most people wouldn't survive what I and many of you have suffered. So my soul was saying, okay, it's time, open up to the next world. And I had those experiences. So yes, the problem, so I agree with you. If a person is open to it, we can talk about it. The problem is I've had some dying people where the family said, you're going to a better place, you need to let go. And the dying person said, would you please stop that? Right? I had one person who was clearly dying of cancer. He had a day to go and he said, I'm going to fight it. And they said, you're not going to fight it, you're dying. And I said, wait a minute, let him go out fighting. He fought his whole life, he's going to go out fighting. So yeah, I agree with you. I just want to caution everybody. People need to suffer and die their own way. We need to be invited in. And if you are invited in, be very, very careful. Okay? So we're going back to this idea of caring for our souls, caring for the souls of others, and creating as much as goodness as we can. And a key part of goodness is, of course, the seeking of justice. All right, that's my my morning teaching.
Can I end on a slightly less profound note? Is
Oh.
that okay?
Okay. I will decide if it's profound or not, if you don't mind.
Okay, okay. I just really, really wanted to say, because I had a mediocre looking scenario that really, it did feel profound. And what you're saying is bringing that up, so I think I want to share it.
Okay.
Which is the Friday night dinner that I went to. I wasn't really sure if I wanted to go. And I'm really learning to find this balance, to find neutrality of, it doesn't have to be one or the other. It doesn't have to be 100% in one direction or the other direction. So hearing you talk about death and this idea of go the way you want to go and let someone go the way you want to go is the idea of letting yourself go the way you want to go. And I've been very used to, as you know, and as you all can imagine, being a rabbi's daughter, sometimes we can feel like we have to entertain or we have to be a certain way if we're going to go socialize, which is to have energy and to be the life of the party or have some wisdom to share.
Have something to say.
Exactly, have something to say, and it can make you feel like if you don't have something to say or you don't have 100% energy, maybe you shouldn't go socialize. And I've really had to learn that's actually not the case. I can go and have these small pockets of quiet to myself and just be within myself. And just because I don't feel like saying something doesn't mean I don't deserve to be surrounded by people.
Right. That's a really beautiful thought. I'm so glad you shared it. It's complex, but it's a beautiful thought, sweetie. So thank you. There's much wisdom there.
Slightly profound.
No, there's a lot of profundity. I mean, the authentic self, what does the authentic self want to do? What are societal expectations? It's just part of the complexity of the human being, and you brought in a nice little slice of that. All right, so we're turning it over to you with your wonderful blessing for the ill. There are people that are suffering, and you bring that intention. The mourner's cottage, there are people who are mourning, and then we have...